So, hi Bob, welcome to the show. Before we start, I would like to request you to share a bit about yourself, your background, and how it has all led you to where you are today.
Well, I'll try to give a short answer, and we can talk more about it as you like. But I spent the first half of my 30-plus year career working at IBM, and so I would say, just in summary, that I learned a lot about relationships, especially with large, complicated customers. And I think, as I look back at the process of writing the book, that this experience at IBM and their focus on long-term relationships really left an imprint on me that won't go away. I worked in a lot of different jobs, also in some consulting jobs as well. But basically, I spent all but maybe a year and a half in working directly with clients or customers. And then the last half of my career, I've been doing this, which has been basically research and consulting. I did a little bit of consulting early. Now I'm into research, and I run the online community, customerthink.com. And basically, my interest from the very beginning, when I launched my current firm 15 years ago, was what is it about companies that customers seem to love? What is it that they're doing that creates that environment that you have these very successful companies, very high loyalty ratings? And so I've been doing research basically continuously over the last 15 years. The book is really the culmination of all of that work and thinking, and frankly, much of it has also come from the online community. So it's been a long process, but that's how it's all kind of led up. IBM plus my current job, and finally packaged it up into a book.
So you did mention customerthink.com, so I'm glad I'm part of that online community as well. I also contribute some amount of content to your community, and I should be thankful to you for having me on the community as well. So how many contributors do you have like me on the community? How many posts do you get on an average?
Well, it's grown a lot over the years. The community started in 2000, and so it's approaching 14 years old now, I guess. We started with 5 people, and the goal then is the same as the goal now. We wanted people who are willing to share, to collaborate, and really discuss what does this thing called customer-centric business mean. And of course, there's lots of different facets of that. There's people in traditional jobs like marketing, sales, and customer service, those in innovation, top management. So, if you go into the community now, you'll find we have 1,700 active authors. We publish about 7,000 posts a year, and we serve around 1 million visitors a year. So it's quite a bit larger, but really the mission hasn't changed at all, at least not in my mind. Although, if you talk to any individual blogger, they're passionate about their subject, and that's part of, we're trying to create kind of a big tent for people to explore their own interests, but also to, if you're in marketing, one of the things I like to encourage is, well, if you're in marketing, part of the challenge, in fact, one of the biggest challenges in creating a customer-centric business is to create cross-organization collaboration and cooperation. And I think the kind of people that tend to enjoy participating in our community understand that to some extent. So we have people in sales. I mean, there are other sales communities, but we have people in sales who say, I kind of like the fact that there are people in marketing posting here or in customer service, and we can see where some of the overlaps are, where we should be working together a bit more. So that's a bit about the community.
So I also see that you send out weekly emails with editor's pick. So does that mean you read all the posts that are being posted on the community?
I do, yeah. At least scan them carefully. It goes through. There's actually several steps. It's somewhat elaborate process. We do a lot of screening. We get probably double the number of posts that you see are contributed, and frankly, some of them are too promotional, or they're just not enough educational content, too short, or whatever. So we have a moderator that screens some of that out. I do review posts, and then once a week, I try to find out of, it could be 150 posts, I try to find the 10 that I think are the best to share with people that are on our email list.
Yeah.
And
And how big is
that's around 40,000 people.
40,000 people? And you've built these 40,000 people over the course of 14 years now.
That's right, yeah.
And I also remember in your book, you had mentioned that this did not start out as customerthink.com. So can you just give us some background about what it started out as and kind of its evolution to its current form?
Yeah, sure. The original name was crmguru.com. And in 1998, when I started my business, CRM was the hot term. Myself and some of my colleagues, frankly, we haven't really changed much about what we're doing over that period of time. I still talk about customer-centric business, but at the time, I think the consulting and thought leader community were trying to position CRM as customer-centric business, as as a strategy and so forth. And unfortunately, it took on more of a technology slant as the years went by, and then we saw things like customer experience management develop around 2005 timeframe. So at that time, I made the decision after a lot of thought that I said, I want something that was not a three-letter acronym. These acronyms, CRM is going to probably stick with us forever, just like ERP, and but they tend to get kind of fossilized. They mean something, and then people don't move on and decide they mean something completely different. And it didn't. CRM didn't, in the end, mean this very holistic, customer-centric idea that I had in mind. And frankly, neither does customer experience management. I think it's just still another sort of facet of the topic. So in 2007, we changed the name to customerthink.com. It was done through a community project. It was kind of interesting because I didn't know what to name the community or the newsletter, for that matter. So we started by renaming the newsletter and did a contest with our community and got lots of suggestions. And actually, the name that won was Think Customers, but that name was also that term already had a URL, and so we flipped it around. And my rationale at the time, I said, well, the customer should come first, right? So customer think, right? Customer comes first, and think. But that term actually was a product of the community, so I'm really happy about that because it wasn't just something I made up. So we became Customer Think, and it really, to me, it fits in large part because we want it to be a thought leader community. So again, Think is not just about thinking about customers, but this whole idea of being a thought leadership community. So that's what we've been ever since, and I have no plans to change it anytime soon.
So we did mention about your book a few times. So can you just talk about the book itself, what that book embodies, where the idea for writing this book came from, and whatever is the story behind the book?
Yeah, well, like I said, I've been doing research almost from the very beginning. I've run lots of surveys. I've been doing interviews, hundreds of interviews, and a lot of the interviews I talk to a company, and I come up, or I have a personal experience, and write an article or a story for my blogging on Customer Think. And a lot of the surveys we're trying to dig into different trends. So I've done CRM surveys, loyalty surveys, customer service, social media, customer experience. I mean, you name it. So the reason I say that is because one of the things that I discovered is that basically any sort of major trend, you could find a correlation between people that practice that that thing, whether it's a methodology like customer experience or some important technology. You know, let's call CRM a technology for the purposes here. And you would find that more advanced companies tend to use that thing more effectively. Now, the problem with that is that if you don't, you know, if you look at statistical analysis, you can find all sorts of correlations in business. And so it started to puzzle me. It's like, well, why is it that when I study customer CRM and I find these correlations, and I study social business, I find correlations. I study innovation, I find these correlations. And when you go out and look at the much of the press, I'd say the majority of the press, you basically find one book that says, well, if you are more analytical, you're going to have a successful business. You know, that's the big conclusion. Be more analytical. You know, it's that's the key to success. And you read another book and it says, no. You missed the whole point here. It's all about being social, and they have their own set of statistics. And somebody else talks about customer experience, and that's the key to success. And you know, since I'm not, you know, I don't own a methodology, and I'm not trying to sell, you know, a particular service or anything. I think I had the luxury of kind of standing back and saying, wait a minute, now how do you rationalize the fact that all of these things seem to individually relate to a successful customer-centric business, at least to some extent? And I came to that conclusion about 5 years ago, and I started to kind of scratch my head and say, you know, there's something else going on here. And so I kind of stepped back and I said, now what is it? There's something about the behavior of these companies that is different. And you can't just say, you know, just use analytics software or CRM software or, you know, focus on customer service or whatever it is, and you're done, you know. So the discussion of these 5 habits, which is how I organized my book, came out of really thinking through and looking through my data to say, well, what are these behaviors, these habits? And I call them a habit because basically the big insight from my research is that big companies, or say companies that are very successful, don't practice these things like it's a program. It's not the thing we do this year because, you know, the bosses.
That's the tag.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that in many cases I'd find they didn't quite understand why I was asking about it. It's like, well, this is just normal business. You know, we measure customer things. We do. I mean, this is how we do business. So they didn't label it being customer centric. They didn't call it CRM. Said this is how we do business. You know, we know that we have to take care of our customers. We have to listen to them. We have to make good decisions. Our employees are important. We have to keep innovating, and you know, whenever possible, it really helps if you can exceed their expectations. Those are the 5 habits: listen, think, empower, create, and delight. And so that's how they came to be the 5 habits of my book.
And the book itself is called?
It's called Hooked on Customers. The story, a quick story behind that name is that I thought about calling it How to Be Addicted to Your Customers. You know, addiction is a very strong word, and you know, people immediately, I think, think about drugs or something like that, and so maybe a little bit too provocative for a business book, but in a very real sense, when you think about addiction, it's almost an involuntary attraction to something, right? I mean, you could be addicted to running or to certain foods or whatever. You just, you know, you want this, you know, basically a pleasurable feedback. And there's a lot of psychology behind this. That, you know, creation of a habit means you try something, you get good feedback, and you say, wow, that was nice. So then the next time there's some cue that comes up, you try it again, you get more positive feedback, and it becomes kind of wired into your person that this is something that you're going to do, and then you start doing it unconsciously. That's what a habit really means. And so when you have an organization habit, the organization is wired. All the people are wired to do the 5 things we talked about. They listen not because, that was a program that was introduced by some consultant or whatever. It's just, no, this is part of how we do business. And I don't know how we started it. We've always listened to customers. So the top companies really create these ingrained habits. And in a very real sense, it's creating an addiction of the organization to its customers. So I like to say that if you want your customers to be hooked on you, you want them to be loyal. I mean, most of us value loyal customers. We like the fact that they stick around. We want them to tell their friends, and yeah, we want that. It's like, well, if you want that, then you have to make your organization addicted to them through these habits. And when you do that, when you create this environment where you're so closely aligned with them, then you'll get the results that you're after.
Yeah, so we're talking about organizational habits, right? So it's easier said than done to build a habit, right? So what, according to you, should organizations be looking at or doing in order to create some of these habits in their organizations? Are there any insights that you have on that?
Yeah, well, it's remember I said that it's about creating these positive feedback loops. So if you look at the diagram of my book, and I have this little graphic, but in the middle, the most important part of the diagram is actually not the 5 habits. It's what's in the middle. There's a little, series of gears that my graphics person put together that is intended to be about the measurement and reward system. And who creates that? Leaders create those things. So I'm not talking about, and I want to be very careful here, that almost immediately people think, oh, okay, so we got to pay people to do this stuff, and that's not what I'm talking about. Every company has a culture of what's important, and the culture is defined by how people get promoted, who gets recognized, and yes, how they get compensated. I mean, how people are paid does influence behavior, but it's not as simple as giving people bonuses for listening or innovating or something like that. In fact, sometimes these can backfire. So it's a very tricky business, but creating this reward system is how you create habits. So if you want people to listen and take action on customer feedback, you create a reward system. And a simple one might be rewarding people for Net Promoter Score. A more advanced way of doing that would be saying, well, there's lots of ways to get scores, and you can have gaming behavior. Why don't we create a reward system around the percentage of customer responses that we actually act on? So, some behavior that will lead to a better score, hopefully, over time. So the reward system is how you create these positive feedback loops, and if you do it consistently over time, you start to create an environment where people say, oh, I know that if I do certain things, certain behaviors, it's going to be good for me. I mean, let's be honest, people do things because it's in their own personal best interests, and therefore I'm going to keep doing those things, and you create an environment with these habits.
Yeah, so as Tony says, we hire and fire for the belief systems that we stand for. So I guess that's what you're also kind of hinting at, right?
Yeah, I mean, I also I would say it's if you hire the wrong person, it's very tough to change a person. In fact, I think it's nearly impossible. So I've done a lot of different jobs, and I feel like I'm somewhat flexible and I can adapt to certain jobs. But in all honesty, there's certain jobs, I'm not going to tell you what they are, but there's certain jobs that I know that's just not for me. And so I think another role of leadership is to really understand the kind of characteristics that help somebody just kind of innately perform well in a job, whether it's in customer service or sales, and so that they're not trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Okay. So, in all of this research that you have done for this book, did you find anything which stands out, which is not something that you expected, but is prevalent um, across organizations, good and bad? So, were there any surprises? Is what I'm trying to ask.
Surprises. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I would call it a surprise. I would say the one area that has been the most puzzling to me is this, and it's something I've been poking around at for at least 10 years. It's about collaboration and cooperation and using social tools. It's to me, it's a good example. It's probably one of the best examples, better than CRM or ERP, in which the culture of the organization is dramatically more important than the tools themselves. That if you don't have a collaborative mindset, then using social tools internally or externally is almost counterproductive. And that the way that kind of came out to me is when I was doing research on social media. So I call it social business, looking internal projects as well as external and how they relate. I found that there wasn't really a consistent answer. It was really more bifurcated. That there was, almost clear failures and very clear successes, and not so much in the middle. There wasn't a clear ROI story. To me, it really spoke to me about the problem that a lot of companies have, is that they don't actually know how to collaborate and communicate just as human beings effectively, because people are kind of stuck in their silos doing their own individual jobs. And so when you throw social technology at these organizations, it can do more harm than good. So that's one example where there isn't quite as clear a story as I expected. And I've been promoting this idea of a collaborative business for a long, long time.
Interesting. So when you talk about this dichotomy of either they are very successful or they fail miserably, right? So there is nothing in the middle when you talk about social collaboration tools. So have you found that is there any correlation between large companies do well or small companies do well when it comes to social business, or even for that example, are small businesses more customer centric than large businesses? I know that you talk a lot about Ritz-Carlton, about Zappos, about Amazon in your book, but did you find any correlation between the size of the organization and the customer centricity?
Not a lot, to be honest. I think there is there definitely are differences. So let me try to answer that question a little bit better. When you're small, you don't have the organizational silo problems. Okay, so that's a plus. But on the other hand, you don't have the range of skills. So as smaller to mid-sized organizations, can collaborate and work together, and they don't have some of the infighting that you see in bigger companies. But they may not have the skills to innovate because they just lack that discipline, or they don't have a robust way of listening to customers. So as they start to grow, some of these weaknesses, these habits that are not developed, start to become problems. The bigger trend across all companies is that companies, as they tend to mature in their thinking, it's not exactly a revelation to say you should listen to your customers. In fact, I think if you look at all 5 habits, most people would say, yeah, of course.
Common sense, actually.
They're all somewhat obvious, right? So it isn't like there's some big idea that nobody's thought of. That's not the point here. It's really about execution. And so instead of, it's like dieting and exercise, like, well, where is the new idea? And yet we still see, thousands of new diet books and new exercise books and new programs, all trying to do the thing we knew 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, which is eat better and exercise.
Exercise.
And yet we keep, so the point is doing these things. And so what I found is that companies tend to, as they grow up, they tend to learn, well, I need to listen, I need to do better analysis and make better decisions. And some of them empower their employees better. The two that tend to be most problematic, especially for bigger or established companies, is they get kind of calcified, if you like, kind of stuck, and they don't innovate. They kind of get this mindset, I have a product and service, I'm going to push it into the market, I'll make some refinements, but that's what we do and that's what we sell. And they forget that they have to keep creating new value. They have to innovate in their products and services. They also tend to forget that just doing what the customer asks you to do is it's fine. You have satisfied customers, and maybe they're less likely to leave than if you didn't do that. So, but that's not good enough. Or if you want to be a leader, you have to continue to push and do more. So this idea of delighting customers is also a tough one for big companies, especially because they say, well, I don't, how do I engineer that in? When should I delight, and how much is it going to cost? And I have all kinds of excuses of why that's not such a good idea. And so smaller companies have an advantage there. They can be much more flexible and creative and innovate and delight. And so I think there are some pros and cons of being small and big, but there tends to be more consistency than differences across company sizes.
Okay. So the next question that I have is in terms of mistakes that some of these companies do, right? So what are some of the common mistakes that small or large companies do in their journey towards becoming customer centric? So that's one part of the question. The second part of the question is there is this book, Chief Customer Officer, right? So, and there is this big promotion or push to having a Chief Customer Officer in organizations.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on that, and do you think that really works? Because I have my own opinions on that. I personally don't think that having a separate Chief Customer Officer is a great idea, but of course, I would like to know your thought as well.
Okay. Well, you asked about mistakes. You could really talk about each of the 5 habits and also about leadership and come up with mistakes in each of those areas. But
the biggest one.
I'll mention a couple that I think maybe a little bit of a surprise to people. Let's take listening. I think most everyone, like I said, would say, yeah, of course, we want to listen to our customers, run surveys and all this stuff, and then take care of whatever it is that they said they would do. And in fact, I've written articles about companies that I enjoy doing business with, and when they listen to me, it makes me feel good. And but having said that, one of the mistakes you can make is to react to customers, do the things they ask you to do, and undermine your own business model, which creates the value and creates a reason for them to be a customer. So my favorite way to illustrate that would be Southwest Airlines, which is known for low-cost, affordable service. I'm a Southwest fan. I fly them whenever I can, especially around the western U.S. And they have a feature of their solution called open seating. So you don't get a pre-assigned seat. In fact, I struggle to find even one other company, certainly no other major airline does that. So you go, you queue up in these, 3 queues, A, B, C, and God help you if you're in the C queue because you're going to be sitting in a middle seat in the back someplace. So customers have routinely said, why don't you get rid of that? So if Southwest listened, thank you very much for all your feedback. If they they put up votes and scores and stuff like that, they would conclude, well, we should get rid of open seating and do what every other airline does. And they didn't do that. And the reason they didn't do it, and they've explained it on blog posts and lots of channels, they said, look, if we do that, we're going to increase the turnaround time of our planes because we can actually seat people faster with open seating. It increases our cost, and it's going to ultimately increase our pricing. And you're going to be less satisfied because one of our core values is keeping our costs low. And so you can, there's another example in my book about Walmart that's very well known, where they got survey responses that said, your stores are too cluttered, and so they decluttered the stores and lost a lot of money because even though customers can say they don't like a certain thing that you do, you really have to look at these changes through the lens of the value that makes them loyal. So you have to be careful with listening, is what I'm saying, and that's something that most companies sort of get that. They're not going to do something crazy just because a customer request came in. So the trick with listening is not just to react, but to make good decisions, to thank customers for their input, and of course, if there is something that's part of your product or service, to take care of it if it's not working right. So that would be one example. I think in the analysis phase, the thing I'm most concerned about right now is as a mistake is getting too enamored with this big data trend. The good news is you have lots of data. It's like you have lots of places to go mining for gold. The bad news is you probably don't have enough time or picks and shovels or people to go, just explore all these possible nuggets of insight that are out there. And so I think, generally speaking, advanced companies might be a little bit different, but generally speaking, companies would be better served thinking more carefully about decisions that they need to make and then looking for tools and data to support that, as opposed to, I've got tools and data, let's just play around and see what pops out, because it's especially now with big data, there's just too many options.
So with both the mistakes that you're pointing out, one thing that is very clear is that there needs to be a lot of conviction among the leaders about what product it is that they are providing and what value or where is it that the value creation is happening, and not to miss out on those value creation process, whether it is during the listen phase or during the analyze phase. But at the same time, one other thing that I kind of noted was that in the example that you gave of the Southwest Airlines, you indicated that they also blog about the reason why they don't do it. So you think that communication back to the customers is also a very key component in the entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll use that to segue to your second question about the role of a chief customer officer. Is that I sort of started out a few years ago, to be perfectly candid, as kind of a naysayer for the whole idea. It's like, why do we need this? And part of the reason I had that feeling is that when I looked at the top companies, they didn't have a chief customer officer, and they still don't. I mean, I've asked in numerous interviews, well, the companies that are really doing well, and two things really came apparent to me. First of all, they don't have a chief customer officer because it's just ingrained in the way they do business, and they're kind of puzzled by the request. Well, why do we need that? It's like this is just normal business. What would they do with this chief customer person? So they already had this sort of ingrained set of habits, and didn't feel the need for it. The other trait that they had is and we can come back to this if you like, is that they're perpetually dissatisfied. So this sort of feeling of almost a feeling of uneasiness. It's like, I know we're not as good as we need to be. You just never. I've never talked to a company that was really doing an excellent job where they said, you know what, we are awesome. We are just, we are kicking butt. Everybody loves us, and we are executing just amazingly internally. They don't talk that way. I've never seen that. They're always dissatisfied. It seems to be more companies that are struggling are satisfied more easily, and they don't keep pushing. To come back though to the chief customer officer question, I think it is an important decision for companies, and I think because the vast majority of companies are not mature in their thinking, that if you bring in and staff the position correctly and empower the position correctly, it can add value. The biggest caveat would be, what is the CEO doing?
So that's
In my
exactly my
mind,
point. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
in,
Yeah.
in my mind, it's the CEO who should be the chief customer, leader. And if that person is not really behind this program and they just bring in a chief customer officer because, well, I don't have time to do this customer stuff, so somebody else is going to have to take care of it, then they may get some tactical benefits because there are lots of issues to dig around and take care of, but it's not going to take the company to the top.
Yes, that's what I felt as well, because in my opinion, CEO is the best chief customer officer that an organization can have, and unless the CEO himself is focused and is passionate about taking care of their customers, the habit in their organization would not be there, because typically it's the leaders who set the culture of an organization, and if the leader himself is not bothered about customers and is not willing to listen to or talk to them on a regular basis, then that's the same culture that kind of permeates the organization.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I will say that there's a lot to digest if people say, yeah, I want to be customer centric, but I'm struggling. If you're a CEO, you've got a lot of different things to worry about. You've got investors that are after you because they want their stock price to go up. If you're a publicly traded company, you've got lots of stakeholders to keep happy, big investments to make, and so. Even if you are somewhat interested in your customers, and you feel like, yeah, I need to do a better job there, you may not know exactly where to start. Where are the cross-organization problems that you personally need to get involved with? And I think there are cases where a chief customer officer can come in and help provide some guidance, almost an advisory role to the CEO to say, look, you've got a problem between sales and marketing. In B2B companies, that's a very common occurrence, as I'm sure you know, that marketing is out there creating leads and building the brand, and they throw the leads over to sales, and sales doesn't like them and throws them away, and there's a lot of infighting. When you miss your numbers, whose fault it was, and the root of that problem is a lack of a shared goal. We're still all in this together to create profitable revenue. So who's going to solve that problem? It's probably it's going to come down to the manager of these two functions, somebody where it comes together. And if that's the CEO, then that person is going to have to sooner or later roll up his or her sleeves and figure out why these problems are happening. Because you can't expect people to collaborate just on their own. That it can happen, but it's somewhat rare, especially if you've given each of them individual targets to achieve and you're holding them accountable for that. So you end up with this competition between the two functions, and you could actually make your job harder without knowing why. So the short answer is I think there's value, but it has to be done right. And I do recommend this book by Gene Bliss, my good friend who's had that job and is now doing consulting. It's to me, it's kind of the Bible of for those who really want to look at the chief customer officer. Think about it carefully and make a good choice before you bring somebody into that job.
So do you know of any organization which has done this right, bringing in a chief customer officer and actually benefiting out of it?
I'm not sure I can cite a specific example right here on this on air, but yeah, there are lots of examples. Jean wrote a follow-on book where she talks about companies that have done a good job as well. So yeah, I don't really have any
Okay.
any doubt that it can be done right. I didn't spend a tremendous amount of time in my book talking about it. It's really in the last chapter, and in part because I think that in the end, coming back to what you and I just discussed, that the CEO is the most important person in this. And in fact, I'll tell you, maybe to answer your question a little bit differently, is I can give you an example. One of the case studies I wrote about in my book is the Sprint, my telecom company. They had I didn't call him a chief customer officer, but basically their chief customer officer was in place when they were struggling and when they came back. Same person, okay? Same person, same background, same skills, same job title, same. So what was different? The CEO was different. They brought in a new CEO, Dan Hesse, in late 2007. They changed the mission of the organization to be more focused on the customer experience, to take care of some of the problems that had been festering, to innovate, and basically do all the things that we've talked about in terms of these habits. And the chief customer officer played a supporting role in that new direction. So I think if the thing I would watch out for is to think that the chief customer officer is going to set a new direction for the company, then people are going to be disappointed. They're going to then label that person as a failure because the company didn't become wildly successful, in a year or two, when in fact the responsibility for that still is at the CEO level, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch the discussion to a slightly different angle now. So if I am a sales manager, right? So what do I need to do in order to ingrain these habits that you talk about, the 5 habits, which I can adopt? So what are some of the things that I can do as a sales manager?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I can give you a super crisp answer on that because there are people in sales consulting that have been doing this for a long time. John Holland has written books on customer-centric selling, consultative selling, challenger selling. I mean, if you look at all of these different terms, I think the root of it goes back quite a long time, 30, 40 years. And I learned many of these principles when I was in training at IBM. And the root of all of this is really understanding what your customer is trying to accomplish in their business, but also personally. That and this may be a little bit strange to say, but customers are people. So I don't know that this would be a shock to anybody in business-to-business sales, but people are trying to get promoted, be successful, and so this idea that we're all just kind of in it for the glory of customers or trying to drive revenue, or that may be true, and it probably is true, but we're also in it. We're doing things because for their own personal gratification, enjoyment, fulfillment, whatever, and so. Understanding what customers individually are trying to accomplish in their lives, and then seeing how you can help them. It's to a very real extent, I believe that the best salespeople understand that in the end, it's how they serve their customers and the company that their customers work for well, and take a long-term view. And when you listen to Jeff Bezos and others who talk about they speak in these longer term time frames. It's not about the transaction, it's about a relationship. So sales managers need to understand that they can't whip their sales force for numbers and not give them time to develop these relationships, which have to be built on understanding what your customers are trying to accomplish and helping them to that goal, and maybe in some cases not selling them something in the short term. I mean, I have some stories from my career in sales where I walked away from sales opportunities that I would have been a hero internally and yet it was not the right thing to do, and it would have undermined very important relationships if I had pushed a particular product that wasn't the right fit. And it came back uh, to my benefit, frankly, over a period of time, over a period of a year or two. And I think that that to me is the challenge that people in sales have is, they're under a lot of pressure to make numbers, and yet the key to making numbers is to not push so hard about selling something immediately.
That's interesting. So the way I see these 5 habits that you had indicated in your book was there are certain things which certain functions in an organization can do best. So for example, listen is something that the sales organization and the customer service organization can do best because they are in touch with these customers day in, day out. Think is something which I personally think that the marketing teams and the business analytics team can do really well. Empower is something that leaders should do to empower their employees, and employees should actually feel that empowerment. So create is again something which the product development teams can do much better or have a much bigger influence than probably any other function in an organization. Maybe to a certain extent sales, but more precisely the product development team. And delight is of course both the sales organization as well as the customer service organization, which actually have a big role to play. Is my understanding of these habits and the functions involved right, or do you think there is something more than what is obvious here in this?
Well, yeah, I agree with much of what you said. I think every company is different, and I think going back to my research, one of my frustrations is trying to boil down a lot of pretty complicated topics to a simple formula. As you noted in some of your comments, small companies are different from middle-sized companies, are different from large enterprise. They have different ranges of issues. Industries are different. Companies are different. They each have individual strategies, and so I wrote this book not to be a prescription to say you should do, all of these things across all functions. I mean, no company can do that. It's really to help people think about and create their own plan. So, to give you a quick example of sometimes these things can kind of work together. If you empower employees, let's say in customer service, they have the ability to spend money. We have stories about Ritz-Carlton and other firms that give their employees the ability to take care of a problem or to do something that's not a problem, to create some new value for their customer if they think it's the right thing to do. So a question I would ask companies to think about is, well, are their employees empowered to delight customers? Like random acts of delight. And that if they have customer contact in sales or customer service, say, well, is there a way to over-deliver? Not on every single transaction or every call or every order, but can you empower people to make some of their own decisions so that it's a culture of, well, let's think more creatively, and something, maybe it's a gift basket. Maybe I was just at a hotel and I got a surprise gift from the conference organizer that invited me to attend. And so I think that part of the challenge is that there isn't a formula, but companies that create a culture where they're saying, look, let's look for opportunities to where we can do more than just the basics. Let's see how we can collaborate. Why is it that customer service and marketing and sales are not working more as a team? Because we all serving the same customer. These are the companies that will create their own unique plans across each of these functions.
So you had indicated that different industries have different roles to play. So I wanted to know if there are any specific industries where they are more customer-centric organizations than other industries, and if yes, what are some of these industries which are good when it comes to customer centricity, and industries which are really bad when it comes to customer centricity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's come up a few times. Like, what is really behind this? And I think it's a very simple answer. It's competition tends to drive companies to be more customer oriented, and it's not out of some philosophical belief. It's out of survival. So if you look at, let's take an example of company. Basically, look at the loyalty surveys and look for industries that, as a group, tend to get higher ratings. You know, hospitality, retail, and why is that? It's because there's a very low switching costs from one supplier, one company to the next. So we can all pick. You know, we don't have long-term contracts with hotels. So, you know, we don't have, we have there. I mean, there are frequent flyer programs and loyalty programs which do have a mitigating effect on what I'm saying. But basically, these are companies where customers can choose. You know, every transaction they can say, you know, was my last experience a good one? Well, not so much. I'm going to go look for somebody else, and I can find two or three others that are also performing well. They can go onto Yelp or TripAdvisor or whatever it is and find other options. At the other end of the spectrum are more utility-like organizations where there's more of a lock-in. And so cell phone companies, I mean, they're all trying harder, but I think what kind of undermines some of their enthusiasm for this is they realize, whether they would admit it or not, is that, you know, they're signing up customers with two-year contracts, and you know, it's not that easy to switch because you have phone numbers, and if you have friends and family plans, you have a lot of other people connected. So there's this kind of undermining mindset of, well, yeah, we want to be more customer centric, but you know, we're making money. All of our big competitors are operating kind of like we are, and you know, what are the customers going to do anyway? They're not going to leave because it's hard to leave. You know, I'm in a bank. I'm in a large bank. You know, it's hard to leave a large bank. So I don't mean to impugn the personal integrity of people who work at these companies, but I think this is more of a systemic problem, that if being highly customer centric and really executing against all these habits is not essential to your survival, then you're probably not going to execute as well. So that's my feeling about that.
So the other thing that you did mention about Yelp and the other social tools. So do you think all these social tools and the result of having empowered customers or consumers has had an impact on customer centricity as a topic? Do you think it is kind of forcing organizations where, like for example, the telecom and the utilities that you're talking about, forcing them to actually buckle up and improve their internal processes to become more customer centric?
I think it's helped. Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I think that's the biggest impact of the social trend, social media used by consumers, is it's created more risk and reward. But I'll say it's the risk, I think, that's gotten big brands' attention. You know, you think about United Breaks Guitars or Dell Hell and a few other incidents like that really stick in your mind. Is that, you know, we can take one incident, just a single incident with one individual that goes viral and can really damage your brand. So I've had experiences myself where I've gone onto Twitter and to try to get some help because I was frustrated with some service I was getting, and I'll tell you, they were highly, highly responsive. And I believe what's behind that is the realization that on the negative side, if you don't take care of that, you've got, you know, a festering issue that's going to get promoted to a lot more than 5 or 10 or 15 people potentially. And on the positive side, more progressive brands like Zappos, for example, they understand that word of mouth on social media is like, you know, putting gasoline on the fire. Is that it's in a very good way that it allows word of mouth to travel faster and farther. So I absolutely believe that it's had an impact. But I have to say that you don't really see, like in the more utility type brands, you haven't really seen a lot of improvement in overall customer satisfaction ratings over the last few years. It's
So,
been pretty mild.
so that's what I was about to get at as well, because maybe these brands are now active on social media and try and resolve issues which are being posted on the social media. But when you call their call centers or when you try to interact with them through the traditional means, they still suck. I mean, I've had bad experiences where I kind of tried to get resolutions on the regular through the regular channels, and the service was so bad that I then went on to the social channels, and the
Right.
response and the resolution rate is just outstandingly fast.
Yeah.
It's as if you are dealing with two totally different companies.
Yeah, that's true, and that's kind of what happened to me. And yeah, you know, when you put something out in the public, it tends to get everybody very very focused on taking care of it. You know, it become a more of a PR thing. But the top companies understand that it should be an integral part of their operation, and there is a role for technology in that. That being able to integrate social channels into your contact center operation is something that companies are starting to work on. So, but if you have one organization that's highly responsive in social media because you know they know that that's critical, and then but that culture is not part of the rest of the organization, then you're going to get the disconnect that you just described.
Yeah. So before we kind of conclude, because I think we are almost reaching the end of the time here that we've got. So I wanted to also understand from you what's on your current reading list. So what books are you reading right now?
Um, I don't have one right now.
I'm
uh,
sure you are right now busy
I,
promoting
I,
your existing book.
I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't read a lot of books.
Ah,
I read books from my colleagues because I have a lot of friends that are publishing books, and so I read books on customer service, B2B marketing. I mean, I probably read or scan, you know, half a dozen books every week. Uh, I'm not going to call it any one in particular. There isn't some big book that I can mention to you. The thing I noticed about when I look back at the footnotes of my book is that how few references to books that I had. I almost exclusively read online, like many people now. So I'm constantly reading articles and blogs. Um, I don't pick up books that often unless I'm on a plane and I'm reading on my Kindle. And I'm more of a fan of going into books, especially that my colleagues write, because you know they're thought leaders in their particular industry. So there's some books that have come out on sales and B2B marketing and customer service, people that contribute to customer things. So I tend to read those books because these are the smartest people in those topics. But I can't point to one of these big bestsellers that I think is really all that great.
so I didn't particularly want you to talk about any bestseller, but are there any recommendations that you have for people who want to take on this journey apart from your book, of course?
Yeah, well, I mentioned a couple that I think you know are very strategic and I think that's fundamentally my message is you have to approach this very strategically and not be thinking about, well, I'm in marketing, you know, what should I do in marketing? Because but I didn't write the book for a functional manager, but rather for a CEO or chief customer officer. So I would recommend a book by a good friend of mine, Doug Leather, who's in South Africa. He's got a book about building a customer-centric organization. So you can find that on Amazon. It's excellent. It goes into a lot more detail about some of the ins and outs of building an organization and measurements and programs. He does consulting in the field. That's a great book. I think Gene Bliss's book on Chief Customer Officer is also excellent. So there's a couple that I think should be part of the bookshelf for anybody interested in this topic.
Okay. So if you have to, if you meet a CEO or if you have to get a CEO to think about becoming customer centric, are there any questions that you would leave them with, which you want them to ponder over? So, are there any such questions?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the term customer centric is very sort of vague and misunderstood. And you know, I have my own definition. It's very simple. It's basically about serving customers, creating value for them in a way that creates value for the company. And you know, that's equally vague. What does that mean? The reason I say that is that I think every company and what the CEO should be doing is if he or she has some interest in this topic, say, yeah, we want to be more customer centric. My question would be, well, what does that mean? And how do you get the organization to share that belief and that definition? And you know, if you don't have a common view of what it means, whether it ends up meaning anything close to what I described or not is almost irrelevant. You have very little chance of moving forward. And the second question I would ask is, well, how are you going to motivate the organization to do that? That gets the reward system. So you don't have a common vision and a goal. I mean, Jeff Bezos said, "I want to build the Earth's most customer-centric company," and you know, but he backed that up with a lot of measurements. The entire reward system, it revolves around customers at Amazon. So, how are you going to motivate people would be my second question. And if all of your measurements and rewards are about products and about profit and about, you know, meeting, you know, individual departmental goals, and you can't find the customer in any of those measurements, you can't find the customer in any of the reward systems, then the goal, the vision that you've outlined is basically meaningless. It's just a something to put on the wall, put in the annual report, so you can say, yes, we're customer centric like everybody else, but it won't actually be implemented in any meaningful way.
Interesting. So thanks a lot for spending this time with me. So if you can just tell us where people can find you.
Well, customerthink.com is the big site, the big community. So I write there along with lots of other people. But I did just launch a new website called hookedoncustomers.com. So it's just after the name of the book, and you can people can find out about the book and about some of the work I'm doing at that URL.
And the book is already available on Amazon to buy.
That's correct. Yeah, you can search for Hooked on Customers on Amazon and find it as a soft cover or ebook.
Okay, thank you. All the best with your book and all the book tour that you are doing. And hopefully we get to chat again sometime soon. It was a
All
pleasure.
right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.